Live.
All right.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the second episode of Fitness Uncovered. Coming at you with new topics that we're going to bring to you. Starting off with, please introduce our topics.
We're going to talk about why we, as a group, I think, we like, and whenever I was thinking about this topic, I was really thinking resistance training in general, and all of the modalities that go within resistance training, but why we like that so much, and as an add-on to that, the mobility, but at the end of the day, we'll talk about it at the end, but why they're really the same thing.
Yeah.
But even more so, even within resistance training, why I think strength training as a modality is so beneficial. So I think that's why what we're going to talk about today, and why we specifically like resistance training and strength training as a modality. If we're going to talk about like setting goals, right? So how are you measuring your progress? What goals are you trying to get to? And the benefits of what strength training can provide.
Health benefits overall.
Put his a little bit. There you go. Try it again.
The health benefits overall.
That's better.
Yeah.
Not just performance stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So take it away. If you want to start with something.
Sensei?
Yeah, so obviously most people that start working out, they get into it because they want to gain some muscle mass, and they want to show it off, and basically the aesthetics that I got into it because of the aesthetics. I didn't get into it because of the health benefits when it comes to resistance training. But definitely resistance training increases your muscle mass. And so muscle mass doesn't only look great on people. Everybody has their own, amount of muscle mass that they think is attractive. And, some people want to become bodybuilders, which is the biggest of all. And some people just want to have that bikini, swimsuit.
Swimmer body. Michael Phelps.
Yeah, Michael Phelps kind of body, stuff like that. But we want to also educate you guys that hypertrophy or muscle building is not just to look good, but it's also for health benefits.
Yeah, to
feel good. And one of the benefits is your hormones. Like your hormones improve. Let's say a guy has low testosterone, and the doctor is telling him he has low testosterone. One of the things that is recommended is to start doing exercise and start weight training, because it'll improve your testosterone to a healthy level.
Absolutely.
And so by improving your testosterone levels, you're going to have more energy. You're going to be more focused. You're going to be more willing to do things. And so your quality of life is automatically
it'll improve areas that have nothing to do with resistance training.
That automatically, exactly. Like you start improving areas in your life that you did not, that were indirect to resistance training. It's not just building muscle mass and getting stronger, but now your quality of life increases, because now you can take longer walks, now you can go on hikes, or now you can play sports that you couldn't play before, or get back into sports that you can now that couldn't play because you weren't active. Playing with your kids, just anything really improves when you improve your muscle mass.
These, I think, are effects that carry over from when you start training when you're younger. They carry over into when you're adult and when you're elderly as well.
Absolutely.
If you can maintain your muscle mass, it'll be way less likely that you're going to die from a fall, or that you develop autoimmune diseases.
All of it, all of the above. And I think that before we move on from testosterone, I think that whenever people hear that term, they mostly think men. But regulating hormone levels on women is just as important, if not more important, than it is in men, because obviously, women have a lot more responsibility when it comes to their taking care of their body and their biology. There's a lot more things, there are a lot more intricacies going on that can be affected by hormones.
They're more sensitive to it too.
Absolutely.
To hormonal changes.
Absolutely, for sure. But going back to what you were saying, skeletal muscle definitely has direct and clear correlation to all of those things, diseases, whether they're physical, whether anything, any type of detrimental things, whether it's osteoporosis or dementia or any of the above, any of those are directly correlated to how much skeletal mass, specifically, as Nick was saying, as you're later on in life, it seems to be that the more skeletal muscle you have, the more you are building to fight against any of these things that could happen.
It's like an investment, just like how you would invest in stocks or anything in your finances related. Just this is an investment in your body and your physical health and your ability to do things in the world that you want to do forever.
And the quality of
The
your
quality
life.
of them.
The studies just back it up.
Sure.
They've done studies that the more muscle mass a person has into their older age, the less likely they get a hip, broken, or a knee or a shoulder. And so for the people that are in seniors that have more muscle mass, they're more likely to spend their retirement having, more fun and less likely for them to get injured, and it's just
There's
less mortality.
There's a statistic out there that I know of. I can't quote the numbers directly from my mind, but seniors that have a fall and they break some type of bones in their lower body, they're like a lot more likely to die in the next 2 to 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what we'll do is we'll attach some of these studies that we're talking about to the description of the video, so that if anybody wants to check these out, they can find these. But yes, absolutely. I think that just in terms of function, in terms of what you can do later on in life, the stronger that you are, the more things that you're going to have available to choose from. Like it sounds, maybe it sounds silly for some people, but just having the ability to reach over your head or put something in the top cupboard of the kitchen, or
Getting off a chair,
touching your toes, picking something up off the floor, being able to wash your own hair, things like this, because we're also going to talk about mobility and all of these things in today's episode. So super important why these things are so important, and maybe they get overlooked because when you are able to do these things, they don't sound like something that you need to practice and something that you need to train. But as you move, later on in life, when maybe you're not throwing a ball, every so often, or you're not going for a run, you're not being as active, and those abilities tend to go away.
Yeah, people don't really look at like general day-to-day activities and think, whoa, this is crazy, it's insane. Like there's less of
it's taken for granted.
sexy appeal for it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's taken for granted. So
Until you lose the ability to do that.
Until you lose the ability.
Yeah,
to
then
do
you're
that.
like, whoa.
Yeah. I do want to talk about metabolism, and this is another thing that's very gray area when it comes to studies and research and all of that. But I think we can agree that just having the lifestyle, because it's not just about like how much 1 pound of muscle increases your metabolism. It's not about that. It's about the entire lifestyle overall. It's a lifestyle when you're lifting weights, when you're trying to get stronger, when you're building muscle, that it's conducive to burning more calories just by having the lifestyle in general. And I don't want to get into you should burn calories and how many calories are you burning per day, because that's not what it's about. But having this lifestyle does require a higher maintenance, which means your consumption can be a little bit more flexible. Let's call it that.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. But it does improve, I guess.
It gives you
Yes.
room
Yes.
to
Room to-
sneak in something a little
bit,
there
yes.
and something a
Right,
little here,
right.
and you get to enjoy things a
Right.
little bit more.
Definitely, if you compare somebody that has 200 pounds, and 200 pounds is a lot, but let's say if somebody has 150 pounds of lean mass to somebody that has 100 pounds of lean mass, the person that has 150 pounds of lean mass will burn more calories, even if they're just sitting there in the
Yep.
couch,
Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
Not only that, but they're also, by them exercising, they're depleting their glycogen stores more often than not. So it helps them be able to
Plus,
constantly
since you have
recuperate and
more muscle mass,
you burn even more of those
you can store
More
More
glycogen.
glycogen.
before you
Even
Thus
processed glucose
develop
better and insulin
diabetes.
too.
Yeah.
So all of the talking
Thus
exactly
you can eat
insulin
more
insulin
carbs.
regulation. Yeah,
Yeah.
insulin regulation improves whenever you have more
Yeah.
skeletal muscle, because you have more of that mechanism that stores and processes glycogen and glucose. So of course, it's just the regulation of insulin and all of those hormones. Insulin obviously is another
Yeah.
hormone that is improved
Yeah.
by resistance training, and not directly by resistance. Well, actually, yes, directly by resistance training, and also indirectly by resistance training, because the more muscle that you have, like we were just speaking about, the better that you're going to regulate those things as well.
So for those people that have diabetes, it can definitely help
Oh, absolutely.
their
Yeah.
regular, sugar levels.
Yeah.
Regulate them, and
For
they'll
sure.
feel better.
And even like people that don't have any of those diseases, if they get off the roller coaster of trying to burn the calories that they eat in the same day, and instead think a little bit more long term into developing a bigger range of caloric intake that they can operate in, long term, that'll be probably more beneficial to them, and it'll probably get them off the treadmill roller coaster.
Yeah.
Right.
I'd say.
Yeah, I think it's something that is more efficient long term. When I'm comparing it to other forms of exercising, like cardiovascular type of exercise, which I do think that cardiovascular exercise is super important. But it needs to be looked at as cardiovascular training. So training the heart, the blood vessels, the lungs. So the cardiovascular system, that's what you're training. You're trying to create a more robust cardiovascular system, a more intricate capillary network. That's what you're trying to really trying to create when you're doing cardio, not necessarily
Yeah, it means to
burning more
calories.
calories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is what I think most people use it for, at least in the popularity of the gym. Yeah.
For sure. So what I was going to talk about is with strength, that, of course, we just talked about all of the benefits of having more muscle, but also using strength, specifically strength, like when comparing it to like hypertrophy style of training, when you train for strength, it requires less frequency, and that's kind of what the study that I mentioned before that I was talking about, the one that Moses put up, which I'll link that one as well. That's what I was talking about, that they compared groups of athletes that were doing strength training once a week versus groups of athletes that were doing strength training 3 or 5 times a week. And when it came to strength specifically, it showed that there was not that much difference between 1 to 3 to 5 in terms of gains of strength. However, when it comes to hypertrophy, there's a different story. So obviously, if you want more hypertrophy, volume is going to play more of a role. And when I talk about volume, it means how many reps, how many sets overall during your week, how much are you doing of that specific lift or specific muscle group or whatever. But if you're, a busy individual that is working a full-time job and doesn't have time to go 5 times to the gym per week, working to get stronger is going to be more effective and more, you're going to be able to do that with less frequency than maybe trying to build 50 pounds of muscle. Right?
Yeah.
So, taking those things into account too.
That's really interesting because about that study you just mentioned, because powerlifters like to do strength training
all the
3
time,
to 4 days a week, and they feel like if they don't do it like that, they feel like they're gonna get weaker.
Yeah.
And if you do more for a certain period of time, it might help because you're taking your body to a level that it doesn't recognize. So your body now has to like, oh crap, I need to get stronger to put up all this training that I'm doing. But let's say you can't stay like that forever. You can't just continue to do strength training all the time, year round for many, many years. You're gonna overtrain.
Yeah.
So sometimes backing off from strength training, doing it once a week, and then focusing on other qualities like building more muscle mass or building more mobility, building your cardiovascular system.
I was just about to say that.
It's gonna help you then when you go back to doing the strength training, take it to the next level.
You have more base to come back to that.
Yeah.
thus creating macrocycles.
Microcycles.
Yes. Yes. So I love changing focus. I think that's another important thing. Like when you are doing some type of training, you don't want things to get boring. You don't want things to get monotone. You don't want to feel like you're coming to the gym and you're just every single day you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And also hitting plateaus. Like if you do the same thing over and over and over again, it's much more likely that you're going to get stuck, that you're going to stop seeing the progress in the same amount of rate that you were seeing in the beginning. So changing focus and being like, okay, so maybe, I'm trying to get overall a 405 squat. It's going to take some time to get there, at least for me, maybe but 405. It's going to take some time for me. But if I'm always just trying to get to that 405, I feel like I'm not really getting anywhere. If it's going to take me 2 years, that's a lot of work to just work towards that one goal. So having different goals of like maybe I'm working towards my squat for 2 months and then I want to work on my hip mobility, or I want to work on maybe I want to actually gain 2 pounds of more muscle. Let me try to do that in the next 2 months. So
That'll also help you. That'll prevent you from using the same lines of tissue over and over and over again, which, as we know, develops injuries a lot quicker than not.
Yeah.
So having that variability also helps you prevent injuries long term too.
For sure.
Yep.
Yeah, and just not, like you said, not getting bored overall. And it just makes you a better athlete overall. If you just focus on getting stronger on the squat or bench press and deadlift and just focus on that, you're going to lose other qualities like cardiovascular, like mobility. And then when you go back to trying to fix those things, you're going to be so far behind. And then your quality of life is going to decrease because you're going to be so good at something but so bad at everything else. That let's say your friends invited you to go play a sport. you squat 500 pounds, but you can sprint for 15 seconds.
And you can see that. You can
Yeah.
if you've ever
And
played
you're
ball
like that
with
stocky guy in the in the basketball court, running, and he's
you
like
can only do that bilateral position.
exactly.
His neck has no like movement whatsoever. They turn their head, they turn their whole body around. Look like a penguin.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think another really big one that I put down here is the bone density. And I briefly talked because I said the osteoporosis case, but or even arthritis or any of those things that decrease that bone density. I think having bone density is just so crucial. I mean, I know that like that was a problem that people had with astronauts back in the day, that they would go off to space on these missions and they would come back and they would lose a bunch of not just skeletal muscle, but they would lose a bunch of bone density as well, and that's what they were really trying to prevent. And it's obviously hard because we know that
There's no
loading
gravity up there.
there's no gravity. We know that loading the body improves the bone density and skeletal muscle, but there's no gravity up there. So how do you go around that? So obviously like resistance training bands, and then the power plate, they actually
thing that
had
moves,
it
like
in Midtown. Yeah, the thing that vibrates.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that?
I've seen it. I just didn't see it in that gym that you just mentioned. Yeah, I hadn't seen it.
What gym?
I think I mentioned
Midtown.
it.
Midtown.
Yeah.
Oh.
It was there when I was there. That was probably 5 years ago. Maybe they took it out, but either way, I don't know. I don't know how accurate this is, but I heard that was developed for astronauts, so that they would have some type of system of vibration will also kind of create some bone density and things like
They
that.
probably marketed that a lot.
Maybe.
The
Yeah,
astronaut
perhaps.
training system. Yeah.
Actually, I don't think most people know about that. I
Oh,
think
really?
I heard about that from like some. I don't remember. I mean, this is how information gets passed around.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, my anecdotal type of evidence here, I guess, but my mom actually started training. I started training her about maybe like a year and a half ago, 2 years, specifically because she developed osteoporosis, and she was training specifically to increase her bone density and to improve her strength overall. The doctors that diagnosed her told her that would probably be beneficial to her. So,
Yeah.
very anecdotal, but
For sure.
people do it for that specific reason as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I know that during my clinical rotations, I saw, and they weren't going to physical therapy because they had osteoporosis, but I mean, whenever you see people, they have like a list of things that they got going on, and osteoporosis and arthritis and all the types of arthritis, rheumatoid, osteoarthritis, all of it.
They can all be improved through.
They can all be improved, and they do see signs. I know my mom has rheumatoid arthritis, and she mainly feels it on her hands. But whenever she does less, she feels it more. So the less she moves, the more she feels those type of things. So it's about that tissue. That tissue needs that type of input.
Which that leads to circulation.
Exactly.
Like having constant movement will help you get more circulation around your joints.
Especially the joints.
Yeah. And so that's very important because the joint is basically the first thing that moves before
Anything else.
everything else. And so the more movement you have there, the better mobility you'll have, and overall you're just gonna feel better.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an exponential increase too, because whenever you do move, you develop the tissues of the area, which brings even more blood flow in the consecutive times that you do it. So kind of like it's like an exponential increase in blood flow, and blood brings nutrients, and the nutrients repair the tissues, and you keep that cycle over and over and over again.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah. I forget what the financial term is, but there's a financial term for that where you get like
Compound interest.
Compound interest. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And when I said specifically joints, that it's not that moving specifically creates blood flow in the joints, but what happens is the joints have less circulation than most other parts of the body. So the
There's no
vascularity is
blood
lower
supply.
there. Exactly. There's less blood supply. So the only way that you can replenish that blood supply frequently is to move them.
Right.
Yeah. Bone density. We didn't talk about blood pressure, but another benefit is definitely that. So improves blood pressure. So people that have high blood pressure, especially, and we could talk about cardiovascular fitness there too, but having that more intricate capillary network that I was talking about, having more efficiency of the heart. And really what cardiovascular fitness is really resistance training for the heart. Like it's putting the heart through resistance. It's putting resistance on the heart to pump harder, right? So, I mean, if you really break it down to what the concept is, it's really the same thing. It's just working a different system.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's hypertrophy, right?
Yeah.
It's left ventricular hypertrophy.
Well, so with the heart, you got to be careful with the heart because you don't want hypertrophy of the heart. Because if the walls of the heart get thicker, then that doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to pump more blood, but you want more elasticity of the heart. So you want the heart to be able to expand more and contract harder. So harder contractions. So that's like when we're talking about like the nervous system, it plays a lot of role in that, but it also plays a role in like what we're talking about with FRC. Really, it's just tissue training. You want that tissue to be able to expand more and to contract harder. That's what you really want. And that's really what you want in resistance training too. You want the tissue to be able to elongate more and contract harder. Yeah. But yeah, that's what you want with the heart. So not necessarily hypertrophy in the traditional sense of hypertrophy, but you want that tissue to be more able to contract harder. So you want more fiber in the
contractility.
Tissue. Exactly.
Yeah.
Just overall contractility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just makes the heart more efficient. So if it contracts harder, it can pump more blood around the body and cover more distance. That blood can cover more distance.
Exactly.
So the heart doesn't have to beat as much as if someone that doesn't have a good cardiovascular system. Someone that doesn't have a good cardiovascular system, the heart has to pump like 3 times faster
to get the same
to
amount
try
of
to
blood.
get the same amount of blood to a certain area. But if you improve your cardiovascular system, now 1 pump can get to all those areas that 3 pumps used to do when you had a weak cardiovascular system.
Yeah.
Does allowing you to do more work in less time? Does improving your
Work
volume
capacity.
work?
I mean, that's in terms of performance, but
Yeah.
in terms of health, people that can be at risk of having heart disease, that's usually what happens. That's just their heart just runs out of energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, I saw that you posted something about work capacity the other day. I wanted to comment on that because that is something that is very important too, especially for athletes. Like how much work, efficient work, because we could talk about how much work you can fit into a certain amount of time, but how much effective work, like how much efficient work can you fit into half an hour? And they do a lot of that in the next level, by the way. So if you end up going there more often, you'll see that they have a whole program based on work capacity. And I think that's also important. Yeah.
That should be one of the bases when you first start working with a client that's very detrained, I'd say. One of the first things you should assess for them and try to improve them. If they're not in shape in that in a work capacity sense, I'd say that's one of the first things I usually target.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I do with my assessments. Like we do, and I think we talked about this on the last podcast, but I usually run people through something similar to the FMS or as close to the FMS as I can get. And then I run them through almost like a work capacity workout where I tell them like today's workout might be a little harder than the rest of the program, but I would need to know how much you can withstand so that I know how much to program, how much volume to program so that I can, not make it on work capacity days. Because certain days I want
more strength.
You said the word that I want to use, which is lowest effective dose.
Minimum effective
dose. Exactly. And I think that that's something important that we could probably touch on. I don't know if you want to
Go ahead, please.
So, I think that a lot of people make the mistake when they first start training especially because of what I was just talking about, to go into it thinking, how much can I withstand? And even though we were just talking about work capacity, and that's something that's important, it's not what every workout should be based on. It's not what, 90% of, I think that if you're going to have work capacity, it could be 20%, maybe even 10% of what your what your program calls for. But most of it should be based on what we were just talking about, the minimal effective dose. And what that means is if you're going to do 4 sets, or let's say if you've never done a set before in your life, then 1 set is going to cause a response in your body because it's more than what your body's already used to. That doesn't mean that 2 sets is not going to be effective, or 3 sets is not going to be effective, or 4 sets is not going to be effective, but it does mean that how much more effective are those sets going to be? Like, because I say this all the time to my clients, we're not here just to work hard. If you come into the gym and you work hard, great, but the only thing that's going to tell you if your program is effective or not is if you're progressing. So are you progressing in your goals? Are you building muscle? Are you getting stronger? Are you getting more mobile? Are you moving better? Are you feeling better? Things that we were just talking about.
Are you sleeping better?
Exactly. So those are the things that are going to tell you if you're progressing or not. Not if yesterday's workout was hard or if I'm sore today. So, I think a lot of people go into it with that mindset of like, how much can I take? How much can I lift? How many times can I lift this? And while sometimes that might be accurate or effective, I think that most of your training should be based on that minimal effective dose. How much do I need to do in order to elicit change? And that is probably towards the lower end of how much I can do versus towards the higher end. And also the thing about that is you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. if you've never worked out before and you start training at 5 or 6 times a week, your body is not going to adapt twice as much just because you're training twice as much. So versus training, starting to train 2 or 3 times a week, where now you have room to increase the volume to create more change in the future. So if you start at 5 days a week or 6 days a week, you only have 6 and 7 to add on. And obviously there's a lot more things that you can do to play it with it, but I'm just trying to make that point. You only have that 6th and that 7th day to add on, whereas somebody that started with 3 days still has 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 in the future to create more progress once they hit a plateau or whatever.
That's when you start tapping into the whole junk volume discussion, right?
Exactly.
The volume that doesn't necessarily add to your progress, but that you're doing it because you think that you need to go balls to the walls every day.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's that extra volume is just going to add extra fatigue. And so it's going to, even though you're working out so hard and you are putting in the work and you're doing 5-6 days a week, it's fatiguing you so much to the point that you might not be able to progress the next week because you still have to recover from all the volume of training that you've been doing in the previous week. And so that's why minimum effective dose is something that everybody should partake on in the beginning, even though we're so excited. Because I remember when I started working out, I was so excited to go work out in the gym every single day. And I remember my dad saying, bro, just what? You don't have to go every single day. Just go 3-4 days. I'm like, you don't know anything. And I'm going to the gym after school for 2 or 3 hours, hitting the same muscle group every single day, chest and arms, and 7 days a week for months at a time. And then you start wondering why you have this shoulder pain or elbow pain or something like that.
It's the birthplace of us all, dude.
Yeah.
And I think particularly athletes tend to gravitate towards that type of mentality.
Because the training that they do prior to their strength training in the gym, they could train on those skills every day because they don't add as much fatigue.
Right.
I can relate to that a lot, actually.
Yeah. And I also think that not just athletes, but in general, I think that when people gravitate towards that type of training, like what we were just talking about, the frequency, I think that that for people to not burn out whenever you're busy, maybe you're motivated when you start, and I think that that's kind of what happens to people. They're really motivated. They're like, something happened, and we in LA Fitness we used to call it a hot button, but something happened that created that motivation that you're like, all right, I have to start. And then you want to start with whatever your motivation tells you to start. So you're like, if I work out 5 times a week, then I'll get results faster than if I start 3 times a week. But you're thinking about, maybe you'll get a little bit more results that first month. It's not even it's going to be significant. It's not 3 times a week versus 5 times a week. You're going to get double, like I just said. That's not the case. But also you want to make it easy for yourself. You want to create a lifestyle when you start training, not follow a program.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. Of course, you're going to follow a program, and you should follow a program by a coach from a coach that knows what they're doing. But what I mean is, at the end of the day, what the coaches should be helping you do is create a healthier lifestyle that's conducive to growing muscle, being stronger, doing all of these things. And it's easier to do that one step at a time and slowly adding on that lifestyle so it doesn't just take over your life.
The main thing is when a person begins their journey in training, they have to make that decision that it is forever.
Exactly.
Forever. Not say, I want to be this big in 3 months. I want to be this strong in a year, in 2 years. No, you're in this forever. So basically, it's a fixed fight.
People that start for their summer bodies to get ready for the summer.
Right.
For their trip with their girls to Ibiza.
Right.
At the end of the year.
Just make the decision, I'm going to do this forever. And if you do that, you're going to get to your goals. Because you always, it's the cliche of, never quit.
Exactly.
If you don't quit, you're going to make it.
And you learn more if you think about it like that, too.
Yeah.
Because you stop. You're not thinking always about, have I reached it? Have I reached it? Have I reached it? And at the end of the day, it is about, falling in love with the process. Because it is something that the more you learn, the more you start realizing that it is something that's going to benefit you for the rest of your life. And it's a lifestyle that's going to be conducive to everything. I think that if you're in the gym, you're probably going to be doing better at whatever you're doing for a career. And not because your muscle's going to help you do that, but because it could. But because I think that the lifestyle and the thought process, the mindset of somebody that's consistent at the gym is also going to create discipline. it's also going to create all of these things that are important. And I know that I wrote those down, and we'll talk about them. But yeah, it's important. Like those psychological benefits too, play a big role.
Yeah, man. When the office guy is looking at the computer screen for 8 hours and then he looks down and he sees 2 massive biceps and he feels so much better about his life. It's like, well, I'm stuck here for 8 hours, but at least I got pics.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true. That's true. I see it every day.
Type in the picture, coach.
I wake up and I'm like, all right, yeah, it's time to go to work. Okay, let's see what's next.
Grip strength. Didn't you want to mention that?
Oh, yeah.
Specifically, you wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I did want to mention this. Yeah, so obviously strength overall is super important, but I think that grip strength is a measurement that's, I think, an easy tool to use to kind of keep track of overall body strength. You could just get a dynamometer. As a coach, we used to use it at Next Level sometimes, just to kind of keep track of where people were at. And I've even seen some coaches use it as like an HRV type of thing. Like if you come in and your measurement on the dynamometer is lower than what your base is, then maybe that day you won't try to get your top set, or kind of base your workouts based on that type of stuff. But anyway, what I was going to is there's a lot of correlation between grip strength and longevity. And I think that more than it just being grip strength, although grip strength I think is super important because your hands are essentially what allows you to do anything else that you want to do. So it doesn't matter how strong the rest of your body is if you're not able to hold on to an object, if you're not able to grip it and hold on to it and lift it with your hands. Doesn't matter how strong your back, your glutes, your legs, anything, your arms, doesn't matter how strong they are, you're not going to be able to lift it because you can't physically actually hold it.
Something that I do with my clients, and they hate this exercise, is hanging.
Yes, that hangs.
The that hangs.
Yeah, hangs. So just hanging on the pull-up bar or wherever, a tree, whatever. But a pull-up bar is
Ideal.
Yeah, ideal if you're in the gym. And try to hold yourself for at least 30 seconds to a minute. And so I think that if you can work yourself to do that, once or twice a week, you're gonna get pretty good grip strength.
Yeah.
And there's other exercises that you can do to improve your grip strength, but hanging is like the basic of all.
Yeah. I use dead hangs as my first progression for pull-ups. I think it's an amazing exercise,
which is extremely important. Yeah. For sure.
And it also, those hangs I also think work a lot, that overhead position, and can be useful for a lot of different things.
Yeah, it shows that it improves shoulder health.
Yeah.
Like in shoulder flexion.
Shoulder flexion is just decompressing the shoulder and just creating more space for it.
Exactly. Rather than just a regular shoulder stretch, you're also, like you said, you're also decompressing the shoulder joint. So you're actually working those ligaments as well because the shoulder's getting stretched. I also think, this is a good one, that whenever you're going into the gym, again, going back to that strength kind of mentality, and you're working on strength rather than ton of volume, you're more likely to think about each exercise as how quality was that movement, like how much quality was there in that movement, how much efficiency was there in that movement. I think that there's more of a thought process towards that, and I think that that's a much better thought process to go into it rather than, again, I need to feel it in my muscle, or I need to just get through the amount of reps that are in my program. When you have 3 reps or 4 or 5, I think that it's more conducive to efficiency of movement, which I think is important.
Yeah, it forces you to be more efficient, because if not, you might end up getting hurt or getting in positions that you're not ready for. And so, yeah, definitely it trains the efficiency of the movement. So I agree.
Yeah. I think we'll talk a little bit more about this in mobility, but I'm just gonna kind of throw it out there. Pain, and we'll talk about pain first. What pain is? Pain is really a signal. Like, it's just your body communicating.
An experience.
Yeah. It's a way that the body's telling you, hey, something's going on. Don't know what it might be, but there's something going on. And I think a lot of people always are jump to the conclusion that, like, if there's pain, there's something specifically happening. And sometimes it might just be that you're weak. Weakness, instability, all of these things, it causes the body to feel unstable, And instability is sometimes the cause of pain. Like if your joint feels unstable, that joint might send a signal. The mechanoreceptors in that joint might send a signal that might cause pain. And if you're just doing stretches and massages and taking, whatever,
Passive means
leave, whatever, anything, you're not going to get rid of that pain if the cause for the pain is weakness and instability. So again, strength could be a way to manage pain. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, next time you feel pain, you can either choose between a massage therapist, a chiropractor, or a trainer. A trainer
Yeah.
might be able to fix your issue more long term.
Yeah.
A good trainer.
A good trainer.
And I think that, like, even because I know a lot of people, I know a lot of people love their chiropractor and a lot of people love their massage therapist. Don't leave them. Just get a trainer also and see what impact that makes in your
Maybe
pain
you have
long-term.
some communication between both practitioners. That would be ideal.
Wow.
That would be
You're
amazing.
asking for a lot there. But yes, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
That would be awesome.
in the perfect world.
Yes. And even if it doesn't help with necessarily the pain, like the resilience for injury, I think.
To develop something else or further
Right.
develop the same injury.
Exactly. Right. So, I mean, especially if you've already been injured before, it's very known that, like, if you've injured something before, you're more likely to injure that area again. So, again, having that thought process of, like, let me get stronger is going to probably make you more resilient and more prepared for any sort of unexpected force that might be applied to the body.
Andrea Ospina, he mentions it pretty often that whenever you do get something injured, that you have that injury, even if it feels better and you don't feel any pain anymore, that injury is with you for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
You need to keep training it and training it and training it,
Yeah.
because that is still your weakest link.
I think this
No matter
is
what.
a
Yeah.
good time to explain what an injury is. And we did this on the video that we did together, but it's important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because people think that one little motion to the side is going to break their back or, you know what I mean? Like it's wrong positions
Right.
and wrong technique and wrong form that's going to hurt them. That's not really the case.
No, exactly like you're saying. Like, I think some people are just saying, like, this position can injure you. And any position can injure you.
Position.
Any position can injure you.
Yeah.
No matter if your squat looks perfect by the eyes of the coach that's training you, any position can injure you. So what the definition, at least Andrea Ospina, at least the way that he describes it, and I think that it's a perfect definition because it's literally the definition of, like, just any threshold of any object. So if, let's say, your bicep tendon or your patellar tendon, if your patellar tendon can only hold 300 pounds, if that's the weight-bearing capacity of your patellar tendon, and you exceed that weight-bearing capacity with a force that you're applying to the knee,
So 301 pounds.
301 pounds, then that tissue will give. It will break because you exceeded the weight-bearing capacity. Same thing would happen to a bridge if you exceed the weight-bearing capacity.
Yeah.
So the way to mitigate that injury, and we talk about injury prevention a lot, but there's no such thing as injury prevention. You really can just prepare that tissue better to withstand more forces, and that's what injury mitigation is. And the stronger the tissue is, the more force it can withstand.
Yeah.
And you can, instead of being a grade 3, tear or something, it could be grade 1 or ankle sprain. Instead of being like a very intense ankle sprain, it could be an ankle sprain, but
You'd be better in a week instead of 6
you
months.
would be better in a couple of weeks better
Yeah.
than missing 3 months or 2 months from
Yeah.
training. So
I think another
Yeah.
part that's important to mention is not only that it may happen that you put 301 pounds on a tissue that can only withstand 300 one time, that can happen in one movement, but it can also happen as the accumulation of volume over time.
Yes.
You may injure that, and that eventually will get to 301 pounds. And that little extra movement that you did, even though it was low weight, the accumulation of doing that so much over time is what made the tissue capacity not great enough, let's say.
yeah, I would say most injuries that happen in the gym are from an accumulation,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Overtraining.
overtraining.
Yes.
Because I mean, like if you get into a car accident, then the impact of that may cause an injury.
Mhm.
But in the gym, you're not in a car accident every
Yeah.
day. You're
It's a more
you're
controlled
training,
environment.
and so you continue to add more and more weight or more reps. You're not recovering from it. Little by little, those little muscle fiber tears, those ligament tears continue to tear little by little, and then one day you might even pick up a 10-pound dumbbell. that is your warm up, and you tear your bicep.
Right.
Like it can happen just like that, and then
There's so many things.
so many things that can happen at once. That is from the accumulation of training. But yeah, definitely getting stronger in the ligaments and the tendons, besides the muscle, can increase or decrease the likelihood of you getting injured.
The owner, one of the owners of Fitness System, where he used to work at, he's an FBB pro, and he used to curl maybe 40s, 45s. One day he went to pick up his 15-pound dog from the floor, bicep gone.
Have you guys ever seen it, like a slowed down video
A bicep.
like an Achilles or a bicep tear?
There's one guy that was incline bench pressing. His bicep tore. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Like 400 pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right, I've already seen that
bicep
video.
or pec?
Pec.
Pec.
Are you
Pec?
talking about? Wait, are you talking bench pressing? Pec,
Yeah,
right?
that was pec.
Yeah, I think it was pec.
Or was who was a really famous guy that tore the biceps? Deadlifting with someone else. He was like a double deadlift.
Yeah, he tore it with
Mike
Chris
O'Hearn?
Bumstead.
Mike-
No, it was with Chris Bumstead.
You sure?
But I don't know who the guy. I think it was.
Mike-
Was it Larry Wheels? Was it
No, it's not
Wheels?
Larry. Well, I think he did that too.
Yeah,
but,
he did do that too.
Was it Michael Hearn?
No, it wasn't Michael Hearn. You're talking about. He did it with.
It's
Chris
a big guy. It's a really big guy.
Bumstead. Was
Of
it?
course.
Oh yeah. It was the guy. He made a documentary on Netflix because he actually he actually broke his knee afterwards. You didn't remember that? You're talking about
He's really big. That's all I remember.
Austrian guy.
Which makes
he's
a
not
lot
Austrian
of sense.
actually, but he's compared to
Arnold?
Arnold. Is that what you're talking about?
Probably.
Colin Von Mock.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that guy.
what's
that
his
guy.
name? Him.
Von Mongen.
Von
Von
Moger or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
He tore his bicep.
What did he tear? He tore his bicep?
Deadlifting switch
okay.
grip with
Yeah. And they were both like
with
doing
Chris
the same
Bumstead.
bar. Yeah,
Yeah.
which makes total sense because whenever you, let's be honest, PEDs. Whenever you use PEDs, your muscles get too big for your connective tissue to withstand the force that they're producing. So it's way more likely that you're going to tear stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a lot of people use that as an indication that you're on PEDs.
Right,
That you start
right.
tearing things
Now,
left and right.
if you're on PEDs, your recovery might also be a little faster, but that's not worth it. It's not worth it.
A little faster for your muscles because
For your
ligaments and
yeah.
tendons.
Well, they're not training connective
Yeah.
tissue regardless.
Exactly. Yeah.
And also better sleep and more energy whenever we start training. Like going back to that, like, if you ever take like some time off training, or if you ever get like just not as consistent, it happens to me sometimes too. Like when I went to school and I took some time off training, I felt awful. And I felt like every day just like lack of energy, and my sleep was off. Like I really couldn't get to sleep, like to the point where like I started using melatonin to like try to go to sleep. And then I start training again,
Back to
back to normal. Sleep like a baby. Feel like I have energy throughout the day. I mean, not like perfect. Obviously, I still have my good days and bad days, and good sleep is good sleep. Like you can't replace good sleep, but absolutely it helps.
that's something that I still don't understand, how weight training helps you sleep better. I just know that it does.
Yeah.
And I recommend it to my clients too, and it helps them as well. But I don't know why exactly doing strength training causes you to have better sleep.
Might be just hormone regulation, I suppose.
It could be.
It
I think
could be.
maybe
Could be.
everything.
But I think I'm gonna research like the
Exactly
direct
that.
pathway as to why.
Yeah.
That'd be
We'll get back
that'd
to
be
you
cool.
on that.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we are good with.
Do you want to mention the psychological effects, or do you want to go straight to mobility?
Oh yeah, psychological effects.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, then actually here it touches on what I was mentioning about the office guy with the biceps, the empowerment.
Oh yes.
Or I guess for girls it could be other muscle groups.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Empowerment. Yes. Okay, I can keep going.
So definitely, Andres already mentioned this, and it is strength training does, if done correctly, because if you have a good coach and you start with the minimum effective dose and someone that is guiding you through it, it helps you create a great relationship with exercising, which is something that I also spoke about previously. Is you want to make it something that you're going to do forever, for the rest of your life. And so developing that good relationship since the beginning is extremely important, and strength training really does help with that, because if you see that you're progressing from week to week, you get motivated, and you see that things are possible.
Right.
And so when you start seeing that things are possible, then you start thinking that anything is possible.
Yeah.
And so that motivation continues. Due to the motivation, now you start getting more disciplined with it, because now it's a habit. And so, like Andres mentioned before, it transfers to everything else in your life. And so definitely 10 out of 10 recommend, you
Yeah.
know, strength training when it comes to improving your relationship with exercising.
Yeah.
Because building muscle mass takes a long time,
It does.
especially if you're a person that doesn't have good genetics. You can train hard and hard and hard and hard, but you're never gonna look like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Chris Bumstead or people like that out of nowhere.
Yeah.
If you have good genetics, good for you, but
Yeah.
that's not the majority of people.
And I think that that's an important point to like kind of like stay there for a second at the genetics part. At least in terms of setting goals, right? Because that's something that was in there. I think that a lot of people that are gifted with genetics use that as a way of selling their method, right? Like if you
Their
train
equation.
the way that I train,
Yeah.
right? Exactly. If you use my equation, then you're gonna look like me. You're gonna get the results that are like mine, and that's just so unrealistic. You cannot base your expectation of results based on anybody else's results. That's just not the way that it works, especially people that are genetically gifted, because no matter how much any of us three trained or even took, PEDs or anything like that, none of us would ever look like Chris Bumstead or like
Michael
Arnold
Hearn.
Michael Hearn. And maybe one of us will get lucky. I don't know. But again, that has much more to do with genetics than not just genetics in terms of how much we can build muscle, but genetics even to that level in terms of how well you respond to
The strength training.
and anabolic
Yeah.
drugs. As
Oh,
well.
yeah.
Because some people respond more than others. So like there's a bunch of things that have to do with genetics that I think a lot of people kind of just like dismiss, and it's easy to just sell things if you don't count that in.
It's funny because I see a lot of the people that do look good and they sell programs just from looking good and posing online. Half of them say I just spam lateral raises,
Yeah.
and they have like bolder shoulders.
And the worst part is maybe that does work for them. Maybe that does work
It-
for them
it
because of
does,
the
yeah.
genetics.
Yeah, it
You know?
does. It does. It's a hit or miss. If you buy a program from someone that you admire,
Mm-hmm.
it might work for you because
Yeah.
you might have great genetics.
Yep.
But if you don't,
But I think it's the job of the trainer to make the program as likely as possible to work
Oh, of course.
for whenever
Mhm.
they're selling, at least for the majority, like the masses. Whenever it's like just a program that's out there, it's not like a tailored program to someone.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it's a responsibility to make sure that it's as responsive as it can be for the most amount of people possible,
Right.
not necessarily for the genetically gifted people, because those are not the
Exactly.
majority.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
that's one of the hardest aspects of coaching is that people have that expectation. Immediately when they hire you, they have that expectation that they're going to look a certain way. And they start comparing themselves to a lot of people from social media. And it's like they might be training for 2 or 3 years and they still don't look like their social media person.
Yeah.
And then they're looking at you like,
What are you gonna do about it?
Yeah, how come I'm doing your program? How come I don't look like that? I'm like, dude, you have to just focus on yourself. Are you better than you were 2 or 3 years ago? Yes? Then you're better.
Box
Then,
is
like that's
checked.
if you focus on yourself and do not look at what others are doing, that's all that matters.
Exactly.
And so if you were benching 135 when you started with me, and then 2 years later you're doing 185, you're still better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talking about the goal setting again, I think that it like it's with strength, like if going in and trying to get stronger, it starts making you pay attention to how other things in your life affect your performance more so than just trying to build muscle. Because again, like if you go in, you'll start noticing the difference, especially if you're tracking your strength numbers. If last week you came in and you were able to do, you felt way stronger than you felt this week, you're going to start asking yourself, like, why?
Mm-hmm.
Like, was it my sleep? Was it something that I ate? Like, what did I eat before I came in
What was the
last
variable that
week?
changed?
Right, exactly. So you start paying more attention to those things, which that relationship to exercise, like it starts expanding and bleeding into other areas of health. And I think that it's, again, another one, another reason why it's so important and why it's so beneficial. Improved focus.
Oh boy, the one that was.
Improve focus.
Improved focus. And before we improve focus, let's talk about the empowerment.
Oh, I love that word, man.
Yeah, I think especially women, I think, is super effective at that. I think that
Yeah,
in
I think they're
recent
more
times-
likely, and it's more like a 50-50 split too. But I think women are more likely to feel self-conscious about their body than men are. Men are too, whenever they're really skinny or really overweight. But I'd say girls tend, like the majority of girls tend to feel more about it. And having a good body for a girl nowadays is like seen as like this glamorous status thing. They gotta work out to have a big ass. It's like, and they're all very self-conscious about it. So whenever they do achieve their fitness goals, it's like massive serotonin hit for them.
So I'll not disagree with that, but I'll say they're more open about it, or at least they talk more about it. But I know a lot of men are very insecure about their, even men that I think, but like that would I would say have a lot of muscle and look decent in terms of strength and performance. Like I think a lot of people are.
So you think they hide it more?
Yeah.
Oh, I agree with Andres. Like I have clients that are squatting 600 pounds and they're like, I'm weak.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude.
If you step into a bodybuilding show, I bet you that almost all of those, and maybe I'll piss some people off here, but
I agree
lot
with
of those
part,
people are super self-conscious.
Yeah.
And the reason they're bodybuilding is because of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
You think Gen Pop's like that too? You think?
I think so.
You
I think
so?
a lot of people get into exercise for that, but in general.
Especially if I got into that.
Yeah,
you
me
know,
too.
when I first started working out, I wanted to become a professional bodybuilder. And so I started being more self-conscious about my body. Like I will have a girlfriend at the time, I will tell her, oh, my biceps are too small, or my shoulders are too small, my calves are too small. She's like, baby, you look great. I'm like, no, I don't. You know, it gets into your head.
Yeah, specifically when you get into the sport of bodybuilding.
Because then you start comparing yourself to those other bodybuilders that are
very subjective,
more massive than you are. And they also do the same thing because they are massive, but then they compare themselves to the Mr. Olympia, who's more massive.
Mm-hmm.
And to them, they're like, I'm small because I don't look like Phil Heath. I don't look like Jay Cutler. I don't look like Ronnie Coleman. So I'm a small guy.
It's also a self-selection bias. I think even for anybody that starts going to the gym, like the more experience that you have at the gym, most likely you're going to surround yourself with people that are also probably doing the same things. And then you're going to compare yourself to people that are also at that kind of level. So it is a self-selection bias because I think that even, with me, like I'm in the strength field, so I'm training people that are, like you said, way stronger than I am. And I think that actually I was going to say that because I definitely was super self-conscious, especially about like being skinny before I started training. And I always wanted to be a pro bodybuilder too. I wanted to get massive. But my goals changed when I started strength training and also when I became a trainer because it feels different when somebody that's bigger than you and stronger than you is asking you for advice about training and strength training and how do I get stronger even though my squat is like 200 pounds under yours. So that I think kind of helped out that ego. But I just think strength is great, man. Strength is awesome. Mental fortitude, I think that's a big one too. And this is not exclusive to strength, but just to exercise in general. Of like being able to get through a workout that you don't want to get through. And I think that sometimes like it depends on the person. Like because I have clients that are like A-type that are there every single day and it's almost harder for them to take a rest day than it is to go to the gym. So I would say that with that person I almost have to go the opposite way of like, hey, rest is important. You want to make sure that you get that. But there's also the type of person that like will take any excuse to not do their workout, especially legs. So I think having that mental fortitude of not just getting to the gym, but like once you're at the gym, if it's, let's say, a cardio protocol that you really don't want to do, or if it's a German volume training set that you really don't want to do, or if it's a top set that you really don't feel like doing that day, like just pushing through that, having that discipline, again, that discipline of like doing those things that make you comfortable, I think is super important. Bless you. I don't know if that was
for sure.
Sneeze or
yeah,
just both.
in that, and also within the set.
Yes.
When the sets start burning and you feel that burn all over the arms or the legs, and you have to like keep going because you can and you're pushing through it. That teaches your body to push through things that are difficult, and so it can also transfer to other things like studying for 15 more minutes about something or
exactly.
Just anything overall.
Right.
But
even social anxiety and things like that.
Yeah.
I think working out
Yeah.
can help because you're exposed to other people, new people you don't know, and you're training, and usually if you're going to the gym at the same time, often.
That one is a very good point because I train people that when they first started working out, they were so afraid to go to the gym. So afraid. They thought that everyone in the gym would be looking at them or judging them, wouldn't be nice because they were not fit. But eventually, as they started getting more fit, stronger, now their social anxiety of being in the gym disappears. Now the gym is their heaven.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really good point, like how it helps the social anxiety. So
For sure. And I do want to go back to something I just thought about that we didn't write down is when you're talking about like strength training versus hypertrophy or other types of training, I think that in general, when you get into the field of strength training, there's better information when it comes to like even the general population, like not even for trainers. I'm talking about like if you are just working out to get stronger and you ask advice from somebody that is also working out to get stronger, you're more likely to get better information than from somebody that's just, again, maybe I'm going to ruffle some feathers here, but somebody that's just bodybuilding. Like I believe, and at least that's with my experience, when I've migrated over to the strength field, I've found that people just are better informed. I think it's because of what I said earlier of like that paying attention to the performance aspect.
Yeah, it definitely has this more sports-based approach than bodybuilding does because you're performing, like the bodybuilding performance happens in the gym, and in show day, I'm not saying they don't perform, like they're obviously isometrically contracting their whole body,
Mm-hmm.
but the sport itself is in subjective aesthetics.
Right.
Like they're not curling, they're not squatting, they're not performing an activity,
They're
like a measurable
displaying
activity. They're displaying their body.
the results of
Yeah.
their performance.
And so I think a lot of the
Right.
studies, especially when we tap more into the old Soviet studies from that Louis Simmons brought over, they are a lot more when it comes to their performance of their athletes, of the Soviet athletes. So that I think we have a lot more information on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
it's just so hard to do studies on muscle mass because it just takes so long to build. As opposed to strength training, you can increase your max in a month, and so you can.
Or even weeks.
It's easier
depending on how you
to
train.
prepare a study for that. Yeah.
And it's also more subjective when it comes to not necessarily subjective, actually in real life subjective, but the measurement tools that we have to measure muscle gain are less accurate than did you bench 300 pounds and did you get stronger? Like
Mm-hmm.
clearly either you did or you didn't.
Yeah.
Whether and when it comes to muscle, like you could get one measurement tool that says one thing and another measurement tool that says another thing. So
There's more room for error
Right.
in
Yeah.
that field. I agree with that.
Definitely.
all right. So
Moving on,
moving on to our favorite topic.
Our
My
favorite
favorite
topic.
topic. I was just about to say that. Yeah.
all of us. We basically want to tie the topics of strength and mobility together because a lot of people think they're separate. A lot of people confuse what mobility is. They think it's more to do with flexibility.
Mhm.
People think that's what mobility training is, but that's not really the case, and we're here to explain why that is.
One last thing I want to say before we move on, because I think that I kind of not talk bad about hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is extremely important, and I think that for a lot of strength athletes, training hypertrophy is going to help your strength. But I just think that as a general statement, having a mental thought process of going in to get stronger to the gym is more beneficial than going in to build X amount of muscle. That's kind of the basis of what I was trying to allude to. So now we can.
Yeah, because either way, if you go with that,
You're going to build muscle.
You're gonna
You're
build
gonna
muscle.
build
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'd say the range of movement that you use is just bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're trying to use the movements that are going to build certain areas of the body as opposed to, well, I guess that would be specific for powerlifting if you're specifically talking about the squat bench, and deadlift. But
But yeah, in general, you're going to build muscle, and it's going to give you more benefits if you're going for strength. All right, so yes, mobility. Yes. So I think it's for us to say, like, we've already said this in our intro, but I know maybe some people didn't watch the intro and are just watching this episode. So one of the reasons that we all met each other was actually because we're all certified in FRC, functional range conditioning, which is Andrea Ospina's kind of baby, I guess.
Yeah,
you might say.
system.
His
like
creation.
His creation.
Frankenstein.
Which is a mobility specialization. And really what it is just a new way of thinking about training tissue. That's kind of what I think it is.
it's a different interpretation of the literature that we have been using for a few
Mhm.
years already on
Mhm.
how strength training is supposed to work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. The system is now has introduced more strength-based aspects. In the beginning, it started as a mobility training system.
Mhm.
And then
But now,
evolved
it's like, no, this is a strength
Mhm.
training
system
system
Exactly.
Like
Where you-
specifically for all tissues,
For,
Yeah.
That's what I was about to say.
in all
tissues.
parts of the strength
in
curve.
all parts,
in
of the
all
strength
ranges of
curve,
motion.
in all ranges, exactly.
So obviously, I think the best way to start this is by defining
Mobility.
mobility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is mobility compared to
Oh
flexibility?
boy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
So mobility is being able to control a full range of motion with your own body,
Mm-hmm.
your own muscles.
Your nervous system.
So if you want to get to a certain range of motion, your muscles should be able to do that,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to flexibility where you're just pulling your limb or you're pulling your muscles to
Mm-hmm.
passively
Yeah.
with something else.
There's an
Mhm.
external force
It's an external force, exactly.
on your
Yeah.
your joints moving you to a certain range of
Mhm.
motion, as opposed to you bringing yourself to that range of motion
Right.
Right.
with your muscles.
So I think a simple way of explaining that would be the difference between how much can your muscles lengthen and how much can your muscles contract.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So like your muscles can lengthen further than they can contract. But your
And
muscles
that's
can
the
only
deficit.
contract. Exactly. Your muscles can only contract up to a certain point. So training the contractibility of the muscle is
Mhm.
really what we're talking about. Like how far can your muscle take that joint? Not how far can that joint go with that external force that Nick was talking about. It's how far can you, with the things that you already have inside your body, without any external force acting on it, how much can you move that joint? That's what we're talking about when we're talking about mobility. So a person can be really flexible.
Excuse me. Sorry.
A person can be really flexible. Doesn't mean they're very mobile. And actually, I found that a lot, especially with like dancers and even yogis and people that do a lot
Circus,
of-
gymnasts.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, exactly.
A lot of
That-
passive range, not a lot of active range.
Exactly. And to me, what that all that means is a lot of room for injury, because if your joints can move in a lot of space, yet they're not strong
Mm-hmm.
in all of that space, then those are spaces in which you can easily get injured.
I think I don't know if we have the space, but I think that we can show an example of what we're talking about, because I know some people that are going to be listening to this probably do not have a clue about what we're talking about, in the sense of what do you mean the lagging, or what do you mean like the not having control?
Would you like to show like now with everybody?
Yeah, so we'll use an example with the shoulder. So I can pull my shoulder passively, and I can show my
Come closer
flexibility.
this way.
So I can pull it this way as much as I can. Okay. Now, when I let go, can I hold that position?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to try to hold that position. Let's see if I can impress people. So see, I'm contracting my muscles as hard as I can. And when I let go, I can
It
hold it
stays.
there. It
Right.
stays. Okay. What you're going to notice with other people that do not train those ranges of motion is that you're going to have them pull themselves. And then when you say let go, this is what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. It'll recoil.
Okay. So basically, they have from here to here, they have no control. So if they were to fall from somewhere and all of a sudden they land in this position that they don't have no control, that's the position that most likely is going to get injured.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to someone that can hold that position by themselves. If they fall and they land in that position, their body recognizes that position, less likely for them to get injured.
Well,
Exactly. Did you hear that?
yeah. I'm gonna go check it.
Yeah, check it.
What happened?
I heard a little.
Yeah. I hope it was this one.
Good.
Yeah, we're good. Let me check this one. Yeah, we're fine.
All right. Good.
Sorry.
I
No,
didn't
no,
hear-
no,
I
it's
didn't
good.
hear a beep, but
I heard it very
I thought
like
it-
I
I
wouldn't
thought
have
the
even
camera was
noticed if you
stopped.
didn't say anything.
I can just we can just cut this part. It's all good.
I don't even think we need to.
It's all good.
Hey
All
guys.
right. Sorry, mild interruption.
uncut.
Do you remember where you were at? I think you were.
Yeah, so yeah, that position in which the person cannot control is the position that most likely the person is going to get injured in. So yeah, that's basically what I
Pretty easy.
the little and this example that I just showed you guys applies for every single joint.
Across
Okay.
in every motion of every joint.
Yeah, every joint, like your wrist, your elbows, your
Fingers,
your legs,
toes.
all
Yeah.
that. Okay.
Easy to see how applicable that is, both from a lifestyle standpoint, from a living standpoint, as well from a performance standpoint. Trying to mitigate athletes' injuries by trying to control as many variables as they can, being if they land in a position that they're normally not strong in, you can get them strong in that position. Therefore, the injury would be either less or not get injured at all. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, going back to that, injury equals
Correct.
Load
Yeah.
bearing
By you
capacity.
creating the strength, like he was explaining, in this range of motion, you're increasing the capacity of this motion.
Perfect. So yes,
Dude.
that's what mobility is, and that's what we're going to be talking about how mobile is your body, how resilient is your joint, you know, how much room do you have to move in, because obviously the less room you have to move in, the less activities, the less movements you're going to be able to choose from in order to train.
Which is a point that we wrote in our notes,
Mhm.
basically saying that mobility is basically the most important aspect, at least in my opinion, because other coaches can say, oh, it's your cardiovascular system, and yeah, that too. But in terms of being able to perform activities, your mobility is the number one factor as is if you can do it or not.
Yes.
Because if you can't move, you can't move.
You can't
Right.
move, like,
It's the one thing that'll be either yes or no.
yeah,
Like cardiovascular, we could start getting to, yeah, maybe, okay.
yeah,
But if you're not mobile enough to do that,
Right.
you're not mobile enough to do that. It's not like by doing it more, you're going to become more mobile. You have to specifically train to increase that space.
The quality,
Yeah, the quality.
of being mobile.
Exactly.
And we see this every single day in the gym. A lot of people do not respect how much mobility you need to do a proper squat, to do a proper bench press, to do a push-up, to do a pull-up,
Mm-hmm.
to do a deadlift, or
Right.
to just do anything, or some kind of dance move, or anything. Mobility is the factor that's going to determine whether you can do it or not
And by proper, I think that what you mean is without compensation.
without compensations. Yeah.
Right. Because you could obviously, like, in terms of form, there's a lot of ways that your squat or deadlift or all of those things can look. But in order for you to get what you are trying to get out of that movement, you got to perform that movement the way that it needs to be performed without compensating. So compensation basically just means that if you try to move a joint and that joint doesn't have enough space to get you to the place where you're asking it to get to, the joints around it might start moving as well to create a false sense of motion that
Right.
you're getting closer to that place.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
So
comes back to the ability of your body, the very good ability of your body to adapt to things.
Mhm.
It will get you to your goal not as efficient or not as ideally as possible, but as efficiently as possible as it can possibly move at that time. That's probably not the best way if you don't
Exactly.
have
Yeah.
your full range of motion locked out.
Right. Your body does not discriminate when it comes to adaptation.
Yeah, it's just trying to perform a task by spending the least amount of energy possible.
Exactly.
Another thing mobility can be used for is as an assessment. Okay, so to expose any kind of limitations that you might have.
Mm-hmm.
But we already touched on that a little bit. You know, if you cannot, if you are trying to perform a squat, but you're limited by your ankle mobility, you're limited by your hip mobility, or you're limited by your lumbar mobility, or your shoulder mobility, you're not gonna be able to perform the squat
Mm-hmm.
like you would like to, and you're gonna end up compensating with other joints to perform the task of the
Right.
squat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that, like you said, the assessment, because a lot of, and I use it myself, I use certain movements like the squat as an assessment tool. However, what I'm really checking for there is joint mechanics. Like, is your joint able to move through space for you to get to the squat that I want you to get to in a proper way? But if I find something that, like, I don't like the way that looks, mobility, assessing the mobility of the joint that you're looking at is going to ultimately tell you what's really going on.
Mhm.
Because if a squat looks funny, then you can start guessing why that squat might look the way that it looks. But if you assess the mobility of the ankle and you see that the ankle is limited in dorsiflexion, then you know the ankle is limited in dorsiflexion. And you can start training accordingly.
Right.
That's actually one of the tools that I use specifically for my powerlifters to see how they're moving. I assess their joints through their squat, the bench, and the deadlift. I see if I see any movement that seems like there's a compensation there, then I'll put that on their online program. I'll put like a specific controlled articular rotation, and I'll ask them to send a video for me on how that moves. But the first place that I use to assess that is usually the squat, bench, and
Right.
deadlift. Yeah,
Exactly.
because it's just because the online format, it's a lot harder for
Yeah.
you to teach someone like how to do a
Car.
shoulder car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, a car controlled articular rotation, like you just said, it's basically just moving a specific joint through its entire range of motion. Or not through its entire range of motion, but rather through the edges of
The
its
end
range of
ranges.
motion.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I was talking to Nick about this many months ago, that I hate the term mobility because people would just be like, "Oh, mobility, okay, flexibility." I just have
Yoga.
I just have to do more yoga.
Is it stretching?
It's
Are we
just
going to be stretching?
I'm gonna be stretching.
I
for
gotta
my
do more
program.
yoga.
I
The
kinda-
yoga coat,
I,
man.
yeah, I kind of
Oh
want to get
my
my squat
God.
my warm rep max up, and I don't think this is gonna help. And it's like, I was telling Nick, Nick, I don't know how we can change this, but I don't know. We gotta call mobility something else because
Didn't we?
ju-
We did, right?
Yeah, and I was saying, I was like, why don't we just call it end range training?
Yeah, end range training.
Because when it says end range training, now it says training, and now
Like,
it's
whoa.
like whoa, like it's not.
It sounds fancy.
Now it sounds like strength training.
Yeah, now it's not.
Why would it sound like strength training, though? Why would it ever sound like strength training? It sounds like they're the same thing, right?
Yeah. So
But yeah.
I don't know. I think people have definitely gotten more knowledgeable about mobility training as of late. I think it still has a long way to
Yeah.
go
Mm-hmm.
because I don't think the masses still understand it yet.
Mm.
Only mostly the people that are deep in the industry, learning about physiology, kinesiology, and just being more deep into what really takes to change
Yeah.
the human body, what happens to the human body when you're training.
People that are curious too, like clients
Right.
that tend to be a little bit more curious in their personality and want to know why they're doing what they're doing. I think
Yeah.
those are the ones that have.
But that's
lot
like
more chance to
the
succeed.
minority. That's
Oh,
like
absolutely.
1 out of 20.
Yeah.
Right.
The rest are just there for you to tell them what to do so that they can get the results that
Yeah.
they need.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that a lot of people go through the process backwards. Like they say, I want to be able to do a snatch. So I'm just going to train a snatch until I'm able to do a snatch. Rather than think, how much do my joints need to move in order for me to be able to perform a snatch in the first place? And then making sure that those things are checked off first, that your shoulders have the mobility to get into that overhead position, that your hips have the ability to get into that hinged position, that your ankles have the ability to let your knee go over your toes and sit comfortably in that position at the bottom. Those things need to happen. Having the thoracic mobility to be able to stay upright in that position without compromising your low back. You know, so all of these things, having the ability to move your scapula and set it back and have a stable shoulder upon which to load that bar on. So all of these things are things that need to be checked off before you start practicing that movement.
it's funny because you said the most complicated barbell movement in existence.
Yes, but this happens to
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah, but it's like, it's true. You're saying it like, oh, I'm just going to snatch. And we're all probably thinking like, really? Like, snatch is like the most complicated barbell movement that exists to date.
Yeah.
Like,
But we have
if
things
you
like
guys don't know
CrossFit.
which one that is, that's the one that you see in the Olympics, and people just like throw the bar over their head and just land into
They
a
catch
squat.
you at the bottom.
The amount of mobility,
Mhm.
strength, coordination, speed, timing that you need to make that exercise perfect each time that you land it, it's the room for error is just so little, and it's crazy that a lot of people use it for their training on a
Mhm.
daily basis or weekly basis, and they're
Right.
they're not even prepared for it, but they're using it.
Shout out CrossFit.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like the
Yeah.
reason I chose the snatch is because of that. I think
Yeah.
I think a lot of people kind of like, especially like again, like CrossFit has a lot of benefits, and even these movements have the snatch is a very useful tool, especially for obviously if you're competing in CrossFit
Olympic
or
lifting.
in Olympic lifting. But there are explosive movements that I think could benefit a lot of people. However, maybe not the snatch. I wouldn't necessarily think that I would have a regular person doing a snatch or force that on anybody. We could do other things for plyometrics and explosive movements. But what the basis of what I'm saying, even if that were just a squat, same thing. Let's break it down. You need that ankle mobility. You need that hip mobility. You need that thoracic mobility. You need external rotation of the shoulders in order to hold that bar in position. You need that scapular mobility and control that I was talking about. You need all of these things. You need that wrist mobility to, if you want to do a front squat, even like so. All of these things, like there are so many abilities that you need prior to getting underneath that bar, or gripping onto that bar that you want to make sure that you have prior, because then we start getting into the world of like people saying deadlifting is bad for you or squatting is bad for you because I went to squat and I hurt myself. Okay, did you go through that thought process that I just talked about? Did you check off all of those boxes? Odds are you didn't.
Yeah. And we're saying all this not to overwhelm people, because I know they can be overwhelming to say, oh my gosh, I don't have ankle mobility, I don't have hip mobility, then I will never be able to squat. No, you'll be able to squat. It might take longer to do it.
Or you might not be using the variation of the squat.
Or you might be using a different variation of the squat, but eventually you'll be able to get there. But that's why we say to hire a coach that can help you with that. That way you can develop a good relationship with training and exercising, at the same time get the results that you want, and have something that, like, when you change your mobility, like we're going to talk about this, like the longevity. We're talking about longevity of strength training. What about mobility? Like,
oh yeah,
it's good to be strong, but to be mobile, in my opinion, is much better.
Exactly. Because
if I'm mobile now, I'm a grandpa and I'm a mobile grandpa, I can get on my knees and play with my grandchildren, or if I have to pick up something under the bed, I can just bend over or go to the floor or split my leg a little bit to try to catch it or something. That's mobility. It's really, to me, in my opinion, the best thing that you can improve to improve your longevity.
Yeah.
And strength.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why we say they're together. The thing is that when you improve your mobility, you also improve your strength.
Yeah, because strength is a
same
part
as the other way
of
around.
mobility.
Yeah.
Like, you need to be strong in order to be mobile.
Right.
You can't just be...
Like the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, they're happening in a range of motion. Just like every other range of motion that you may be training with mobility training.
Yes.
Right.
Mobility training.
Right.
And range training. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think, like, again, what you were just saying, kind of touches again on that activity selection. Like, the more mobile you are, the more freedom you're going to have in terms of being like, I want to be able to go and do this. I want to play with my kids. I want to be able to garden. I want to be able to, I don't know, vacuum my top shelf. Like, in order to be able to do those things, you need to have the ability to get to those positions. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, maybe like we talked about with compensation, you could possibly be doing these things. And I would also say that, like, maybe if you don't have the perfect mobility, you might be able to, like, squat and get away with those things and be okay. But it can also be something that you are working to improve on so that over time you don't run into any issues.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely some things that maybe I'm not mobile enough that I'll still kind of train with knowing that, like, I am also on the side training that capacity, that ability, so that in the future I'm better and better and better and better.
Yeah. I want to talk about mobility and muscle mass. Mobility for hypertrophy, gaining muscle mass.
How it can make you better at putting on muscle.
Putting on muscle.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the most interesting topics that I've learned in the last few years when it comes to this system of the functional range systems. That the more access to tissue you have, the more tissue you can train. So that means more muscles you can train. And thus, you end up developing more muscle mass. So let's say bodybuilders who are notoriously known for not being mobile. If a bodybuilder becomes more mobile, like, they already have a lot of muscle mass. But if you can make them more mobile to get into different positions that they couldn't get before because they didn't have that, they had those restrictions. Now, all of a sudden, you can add even more muscle mass into their frame, which is what they're looking for in their sport. But not only that, what about the posing? If you can move better, when you do that front double bicep pose or that lat spread or that quad, flex that you do, or even, like I said, like the lat spread. If you can mold, like, that scapula open more, those lats, even if they're small, they're going to look bigger. Or like, if you have to do the front, that back bicep pose where you have to, like, externally rotate that shoulder and then just flex that bicep. I don't know why bodybuilders have not gotten into it. Maybe a few have, but not the majority.
Yeah. Especially if you're a bodybuilder and you like that classic type of style of posing, like, when we're talking about, like, the 80s kind of style
classic
of posing.
Physique.
Yeah.
Style.
Those poses require a lot of mobility, controlling positions, owning those positions, and not just being able to like hit them for a second and then come out of it. Like being able to hold those positions and control that. And also, this is super important. I think that going back to, the compensation part, I also think that, especially with the way that we use mobility as strength training and end range training, it teaches you to disassociate joint movement. So the difference between when you were doing that internal rotation, like, are you getting protraction from your scapula? Like, is your shoulder, or in other words, is your shoulder rolling forward as you're trying to internally rotate? Or is your spine extending when you're trying to externally rotate? So that not just during the mobility training you could actually hit what you're trying to hit, but also so that when you're doing face pulls for your rear delts, or when you're doing, even your bench press, so that you could really understand the kinesiology of your body, like what is actually moving, what joint am I using for this exercise, and is that what I'm trying to actually work? Is that the muscle that I'm trying to train? Is that the movement that I'm trying to train? Because a lot of people, again, you don't necessarily need to know that you're compensating to be compensating. Most people don't know. The reason they're compensating is because they don't know that they're compensating. They think they're doing the movement properly, but they're extending their spine instead of extending rotation.
Aren't the best athletes in the world masters at compensation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
But that comes at a trade-off to their joints and ligaments.
Yeah. So what he's referring to is actually a super interesting point, that when you see a lot of these top elite athletes in their sport, and when you break down their movement, especially if you're a strength coach, if you go and break down their movements, you could see a lot of leaks of energy. You could see a lot of compensation, but they're still getting better numbers than everybody else. So it's that whole thing about like science and about what is the perfect form again, like there not being such thing as that. But just
it's
again,
a very interesting topic. Is there such a thing as perfect form?
Yeah, I made a reel about that very recently, actually.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. But I think you guys want to touch on that, the whole thing of perfect
important.
form.
That'd be great.
So I want to give my anecdotal evidence that I've seen when I train people, or the people that I've trained. I've seen people with a perfect deadlift, quote unquote, perfect deadlift form, and they have lower back pain, like debilitating lower back pain. And I have seen people round their spine
And be fine.
and just deadlift 600 pounds, 650, and no pain whatsoever. So when you give those two examples of people, what's the answer? Like,
the guy that's rounding his back is definitely doing it wrong. And I don't. The person that has pain and has a perfect deadlift,
He's gonna snap any day now.
So then I've thought about it, and my conclusion is, if you do a perfect deadlift, is it because it's for injury prevention, or is it because it's more efficient to do it that way, so you can lift the most amount of weight?
Why are you doing it?
Yeah. So for me, I was like, I have powerlifters that lift with the rounded back, and it works for them.
If anything, in some cases, it might be more efficient.
Maybe more efficient for
Depending on their biomechanics,
right.
let's say.
Yeah. So I deadlift with a rounded back.
Mm-hmm.
My sumo deadlift, it helps me when I tuck in my lumbar spine. It helps my hips to get closer to the bar. So then when I get the bar off the floor,
Decreasing the lever.
I basically just lock it out very easily.
Mm-hmm.
But then if I were to put that on Instagram, people are gonna be like, "What are you doing? You're a trainer. You're like rounding your spine. You're teaching this to all your clients." And it's like, well, the thing is that I train my spine in that position in order to do that, so that I don't get hurt.
Right. And I think let's be a little bit more specific about what we're talking about, because there's definitely maybe if like another trainer that just read an article on this.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of powerlifters, when we're talking about rounding their spine, most of that rounding is probably coming from their thoracic spine and not their lumbar spine. Which, if you talk about like strongmen, you see this almost in every single lift, because let's say you're grabbing an Atlas stone. And an Atlas stone, if you don't know what that is, it's those big boulders that you see strongmen lifting. You have to round. And for most objects in your life outside of the gym that you're going to pick up that are heavy, you're going to get some rounding, because it's not a perfect bar that you can hold on to and retract your scapula and get into a good position.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's even beneficial. That's why I think the Jefferson curl could be beneficial for a lot of people, because you are going to need to have capacity with a rounded back in order to hold weight without
Mhm.
injuring yourself.
It's like people think that they're never gonna pick up something heavy off the floor without the perfect deadlift form.
Right.
Like if they deviate a little bit from it, it's like no,
Yeah.
your spine's gone.
Yeah.
It's like in real life that doesn't really happen. Like you're picking
Exactly.
things up off the floor with however your spine's like this, it's like that. Your scapula's protracted, retracted. Like it doesn't really.
Now, we're not saying for everyone listening to go now to the gym and deadlift with a rounded back and
Mhm.
try to deadlift what you usually deadlift.
Right. I'm not going
Okay.
to cue anybody into
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah. But definitely you can get hurt on your spine if you have not trained that position of
not
rounded,
prepared.
around the thoracic spine. If you have never trained it, or maybe around the lumbar spine, and you all of a sudden load it up with 135 because that's lightweight, you can definitely end up hurting yourself. And so what we're trying to say is that you have to work up to doing it that way.
To
So
anything.
you will have to start with a minimum effective dose, like we discussed earlier in the podcast, starting with one set or starting with a certain amount of weight that is very light, and then little by little, just progressively overload as the weeks go by. If you do that, then you will then prepare your tissues, your muscles, ligaments, and tendons to do those positions, less likely for them to get injured.
The concept is the same for everything. If you choose this, whatever your paradigm of the safest exercise is, and then you exceed the load of whatever that tissue is being used during that exercise is, you're going to get injured, even if it's the safest exercise
Right.
you can think of.
That's applicable to a curl, a tricep extension, a deadlift, a squat, whatever movement of every joint, of every range of motion ever.
A cough.
Yeah.
A cough.
Cough too hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's tough, dude.
I'm sure it's happened to someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure it has.
Well, yeah.
So
You guys will get there earlier than me.
Okay. Movement selection, disassociation. I think
What
we talked
about-
a little bit about tissue
Yeah.
training, but not too much.
we haven't talked about tissue training and pattern.
Yeah.
Oh,
training.
yeah.
Yeah, this is a big one. This is a very big one. So,
This one's gonna
differentiate.
confuse most. This is one's gonna be a little confusing
Yeah,
for people.
I think it goes directly against the
The grain.
grain of like
yeah.
sport specificity because everyone out there is doing sport specific training as opposed to what we do more, which is tissue specific training.
tissue specific training.
Yeah, there's a big difference between both of them, and I'd say like at least 90% of the industry is more focused on sport specific training as
Mhm.
opposed to.
Right.
When you say sport specific training, you mean like
Skill training.
the
Just-
skill training.
Yeah.
So-
Getting better
Well,
at doing
I think
so
they
now
tra-
we have to define what
Yeah.
is a skill.
So
Okay.
I see. Well, I guess it's more like what they see in the gym. It's they try to mimic what the movements they're using in their sport and try to
Mhm.
try to train that in the gym as
Mhm.
well as in their skill training in their sports. It's like they're doubling down on the same exact movement pattern over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's call it skill acquisition because that's
Yeah.
actually what it is.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
skill acquisition.
So a skill, basically, what we usually do, and I love this. I'm going to be paraphrasing a lot, Dr. Spina, because I love watching his lectures,
Mm-hmm.
and he is so great at explaining this. So good because he's like, the squat. Would you guys say that a squat is a skill?
Yes.
Squatting is a
Yes.
skill.
Yeah.
Squatting is a
Sure.
skill that you acquire by someone else teaching you how to do it,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like Dr. Spina says, it's not like it's in your brain and you just
Oh, like there's no pattern. Like
you,
there's no.
you click the button and you say squat.
And
then you squat.
Like a machine.
Right.
Machine.
Yeah.
It's something that you learn from what you see others do. Even as a baby, when you squat, your baby have seen the mom squat to pick up something. So then the baby is like, oh, maybe I should do that too if I'm gonna pick up something from the
They
floor.
mirror it.
Yeah,
I
mirror
think-
it.
I like the way that I think you did a video on this. I like the way that you described it, which was something along the lines of like the squat is a skill of having your hips, your knees, and your ankles
All
flex at
all
the
the
same
flexion,
time
yeah.
in a specific rhythm
Yeah.
and then extend at the same
It's
time.
just
in
a movement in
specific
3D
rhythm.
space.
Right.
That's all it is. Like
Yeah.
just like any other movement. This is a movement in 3D space. This
Mhm.
is a movement in 3D space.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So it's just that, and insert whatever exercise instead of the squat.
Yeah.
Like
Correct.
Same thing.
So skill training is the pattern training. When we go to the gym, we learn patterns. The most popular thing to do now is to squat, bench, and deadlift, and clean and jerk and snatch, and
Right.
those are pattern movements.
Right. So if you're going to the gym, most likely you're doing some variation of a squat, some variation of a hinge, some variation of a pull, some variation of a press,
Row.
and some variation of trunk control /
Right.
movement.
And so we all grow up reading these articles saying that deadlift is a great exercise for the lower back. The deadlift is a great exercise for the glutes. The deadlift is a great exercise for the hamstrings. So all we need to do is deadlift if we're trying to develop that. But the deadlift doesn't take into account that the lower back can flex and extend. How do they teach you how to do a deadlift? Neutral spine.
Mm-hmm.
So people just learn how to keep their spine immobile, like just
Static.
keep it static
Stiff.
there. Do not flex it, do not extend it. But your spine does flex and extend.
And it
if you-
rotates.
and it rotates, like thoracic does rotate and stuff like that. The lumbar spine rotates a little bit,
A little bit.
a little bit,
Yeah.
not as much as
Not as much, but yeah, it does. It
Yeah.
has some rotation.
So you see, like we just mentioned 4 things that the spine can do, and the deadlift does not train all 4 things. So in reality, the deadlift does not train the spine.
Mm-hmm.
The spine is involved, but it does not train the spine
Mhm.
how it's supposed to be trained.
Right.
So the glutes do what? They
Extend the
Extend.
hip, externally rotate
Externally
the hip.
rotate.
Internally rotate, abduct.
abduct. So when you're doing a deadlift, are you doing any of those things except for hip extension? Are you doing any abduction? Are you doing any
Very
flexion?
minor.
Maybe very minor movements.
Stabilization
Yeah,
movements
Yeah.
kind of thing, yeah.
For the hamstrings. The hamstrings also flex. They don't just like your knee flexes.
Yeah.
So
And guess what? Your hamstrings even have action in the extension of
Right.
your knee as well.
Right,
Eccentrically, but they work on it.
right.
Yeah.
So if we just fall into the pattern training where we're just doing deadlift, squats, and bench press, we do hit those muscles and we do hit those joints, but we're missing a lot of movement
It's incomplete.
that they do, and it's incomplete.
I think a better way of, and I think that this is one of the things that I saw in the curriculum, again, it's like this muscle has these actions. And even when we were just talking about, like, yes, what the muscle really does is it gets the origin and insertion closer to each other. And that's an umbrella term because now the origin and insertion can get closer to each other by doing so many different things, right? So like that's really what the job of a muscle is to get the origin, so where the muscle originates and where the muscle inserts on a bone. It's bringing those 2 points closer together and then controlling the lengthening portion as well. So that's, and then again, these things can happen in so many different ways. So your bicep doesn't just flex your elbow. It gets this point closer to this point in any position that you're in. So if you're here, it technically also will help with horizontal adduction of your shoulder. You know, and technically the only thing that does that is your pecs and pec minor, and but the bicep also helps with that in your flies. So if you're doing flies, your bicep is also helping with that.
Right.
The biggest difference is thinking instead of muscle functions, thinking joint functions, because the joints operate in a lot more different ways, and you see the lines of tissue of the
Yeah.
muscle.
Yeah.
And even if you think about joint, you're gonna end up training the muscle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you think about what the joint is doing,
Because it's
you're
the
gonna
first thing that
you're
moves.
gonna train the muscle tissue too. So
Yeah. So to get back to what we were talking about in terms of pattern training, it's very important. Like obviously, if you want to get better at your squat, you should be squatting. But also, like we were talking about, you want to prepare those tissues so that you're coming to the squat with a more prepared body. You got to train the tissues that are responsible for performing the squat. Right, so like if you're thinking about like, oh, my hip is tight when I'm squatting, then you should be training the hip. You shouldn't be using exercises that train your hip. You should be thinking about what positions does my hip need training in, and what tissues of my hip need more resilience, right? So taking that approach on top of practicing what you're doing, because obviously you want to practice what you're doing, and if you're an athlete, what Nick was kind of touching on is, if you're an athlete that is training every day or almost every day or even every other day, how much more practice of the same movement do you think you need? Like, if you're batting for 2 hours on a day and then you go to the gym and you start training that same rotational
batting.
movement, like you keep batting like
Now you're doing loaded batting.
exactly.
Yeah.
Now you're doing loaded. That same line of tissue, like we were talking about training different lines of tissue, like you're more likely to just keep aggravating those same lines and cause injury in the long
right, that's
long
why they
run.
have a lot of oblique, tears, and
Why specifically oblique?
because they just overuse it.
Oh,
Yeah.
like
They
specifically
just,
like
just
with
rotating,
the bat.
rotating, yeah,
Yeah.
with the
Okay.
bat.
Yeah.
With the bat, and then go to the gym and they do medicine ball rotations to the wall
Exactly.
with a lot of force and a lot
Yeah.
of speed.
Right.
And so they don't. When are you gonna rest
Yeah.
Right.
Like, when are you gonna rest your obliques?
Now,
to recover?
if you're just starting a sport, I could see some benefit of that. If you have a coach, like if you're really wanting to get into baseball and you have a strength coach, like he could show you the mechanics of rotation, which I think is important, like understanding rotational mechanics to get into the bat. But if you're somebody that you're already into that sport, you don't need to be spending,
Especially a professional.
right.
You already know how to swing a bat.
Yeah,
You
like
already-
the
you're
the,
swinging
the
it enough.
skill acquisition they can have is incrementally less,
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
like a smaller percentage of how much better they're gonna get.
Yeah. At that
Yeah.
point, what they're doing is just reinforcing.
Yeah.
And then to take it into the other direction, even if you are a coach and you get a professional athlete that maybe you look at their rotational capacity and their rotational mechanics and they're not what you want them to be, it doesn't mean that you got to go and change their mechanics for that rotational movement to make them a better athlete. What you need to do is make sure that, again, going back to the same thing, make sure that the tissues that he's using are prepared for him or her to use those tissues in the way that he's using them.
Right.
Because especially like where we talked about earlier about the top of the line athletes being
Masters
super
of
compensators,
that
right?
adaptability.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of them are going to have these leaks of energy. A lot of them are going to have these compensation patterns. And as much as in a beginner athlete you might want to correct those things so that you don't want to run into problems later on, if somebody's already doing that and has been doing it with no problems forever, you might even run into the problem where, like, for a throwing athlete, if you change their throwing mechanics, they'll throw like slower.
Yeah, that's a really great point that you're making, because throughout history, let's say, for example, in the Olympics, there has been sprinters that do not sprint how the textbooks teach you how to sprint,
Exactly.
or how a coach teach you how to sprint. They might sprint very awkwardly, like their form is very awkward, but it works for them,
Mm-hmm.
and they're winning, medals.
They're beating
wha-
the people that mechanics are by the book.
Right, and so as a coach, you don't want to change that, because if you all of a sudden it's like, oh, you're not running like you're supposed to. Now all of a sudden you're taking away what's making them successful, and then you try to switch it thinking that it's gonna make them better, and then they end up being worse.
Yeah.
So just prepare the tissues to do exactly the little compensations, the little awkward ways of them performing the task, and make it better, make it more explosive, make it stronger, make it faster, whatever, and
Yeah.
more endurance in it. So
I've read articles about vertical jumps, and a lot of, again, like NFL players. Actually, NFL is a fun fact, but NFL players have a higher vertical than NBA. I think a lot of people would think that, like, basketball players have higher verticals, but you got to think
interesting.
basketball players are also super tall. They don't need such big verticals. But either way, so yes, the average vertical jump for the NBA is lower than the average vertical jump for
But I
NFL.
think that I know how that makes sense, because in basketball you need a little bit more endurance.
Mm-hmm.
In football you just have to be
Explosive.
explosive.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So what I was going to say is that some of the people with the highest verticals have knee valgus. So what knee valgus is when you're squatting or when you're jumping, when you're coming back up from that recoil from the bottom position, the knees kind of cave in. They collapse inward. So that's really internal rotation of the hip, but a lot of them have that. And I've seen a lot of articles also talking about how internal rotation is a downward force. So it makes sense when it comes to mechanics, but we've been taught that when you're squatting, you don't want that to happen.
Keep your knees out.
To keep your knees out. Exactly. Which also could be contributing in some people to their back pain. Because knees out is not necessarily what you want to do with a squat. You want to keep the knees stable.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a better cue that I use with people is like aim with your knees. Like aim to follow your toes, your big toe specifically. Aim to follow your big toe with your knees. Not necessarily out, but aim. Just food for
That's
thought.
a really interesting fact. I didn't
Me
know
neither.
that.
I would
didn't
never
know
think
that.
of it either.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've
That's the
seen
exact-
videos of professional football players,
Yeah.
like NFL players, dunking. It looks
Dude, they're
it looks
crazy.
awkward, but they're like 5'10" and they're
Yeah.
dunking.
Definitely
Like they're
jumping
like
higher than you
6'1" and they're dunking. So
Yeah.
um,
And
yeah.
a lot of them have that valgus, yeah. A lot of big squatters in powerlifting have that too.
That's a huge topic.
Dude,
Yeah.
don't even get me started.
Yeah,
then.
that's a huge
Yeah.
topic.
I-
I know Nick has
Yeah.
has had the.
I got so much clashback for having clients of mine with knee
I
valgus.
think we talked about
And
this, yeah.
People online, for lack of a better term, shit on me for that, for allowing my clients to have knee valgus. Like, it's gonna get hurt. Like, they're gonna blow their knees out. It's like, she's doing fine. pretty strong in that position,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
and it's an issue because it obviously gets into the athlete's head, right? And then they start not trusting you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it falls a lot on like people's first coach, because those first cues, especially if you see progress, especially if you see results from it, if you marry those cues like chest up or, you know, a big one is obviously like the knees.
Knees out, knees out,
Knees
knees
out.
out.
The technique cues the fixes.
Right.
I gotta
And I
fix
think
my
that
form.
Cues, more specific than cues for an exercise, cues are specific to people. So when you're training people, especially when you're one-on-one, the cues that you might use for one person are not going to work for everybody. And even the cues that you might work for that person might not work forever for that same person.
Yep.
So, yeah, cues are very specific to the individual. Excuse me.
Did we touch on everything?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we touched on adaptability, right?
I think we could dive a little bit deeper because I think most people, again, going back to that, like, I'm scared to do that. Like, I was taught that you shouldn't bend your spine and things like that. Your tissue, in any tissue in the body, as long as you're alive, if you're still breathing, it can adapt. And it can adapt pretty significantly, I think, in most cases. Even, like, obviously, like, as you age and all of that stuff, and maybe if your immune system and even generally your metabolic system, if anything is affecting it, if there's a lot of stress on your system, the potential for adaptation is lower.
Plasticity is
Right.
less. Yeah.
But like I said, as long as you are living and breathing, your body is able to accommodate to input that you're giving it frequently. Then that's the key. Like, it's not like you can just work out one day and your body's going to say, like, we need to get stronger for the rest of our lives. Like, it's not going to work like that. It needs to be over time, and it needs to have enough frequency for your body to actually make the decision that, okay, I need to add some tissue or lose some tissue or whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the way that you adapt tissue, how do you adapt tissue?
I mean, there's different ways to do it, but
Progressive overload.
the progressive overload is the simple answer of doing it.
Mhm.
And so
Again, that's more like an umbrella term,
But
which
that's- yeah, it's-
encompasses
it's
a
a-
lot of different
it's very
modalities. And
dependent on the person. See how much experience a person has in their training, whether it's a beginner or an advanced.
what
you
are they
know,
training for?
what are they training for?
Mhm.
So
It's a loaded question, bro.
Yeah,
it is. It is. But
it's just I don't want to start saying like things that I do and things and it's just
Yeah, I feel you. But let me try to simplify it because
Yeah.
I think that there is a way that we can kind of.
Were you looking for a
'Cause, like,
specific answer?
because
No,
like
no, I
we
wasn't.
say
I wanted to
progressive
see what you guys
overload
wanted
and
to
people are gonna be like, okay, I'll do more reps.
So,
Okay, I'll do
right.
more sets.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll add an exercise.
So going back to that minimal effective dose,
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to approach it. I think that progressive overload, in general, is doing a little bit more than what your body's used to. Whether that's reps, whether that's weight, whether that's range of motion, any of the above.
Less rest time.
Less rest time, exactly. More frequency, more days in your week that you're training. So all of these things are variables that throughout your training career are most likely going to improve or increase or whatever. That are all ways to measure progress and always to progressively overload so that you continue to get progress. And the best way to use them is sparingly, not use the same one all the time. Like we were talking about in the beginning, switching modalities, switching the focus of what your workouts are going to be. But at the end of the day, it's that kind of concept of doing a little bit more than your body is accustomed to so that it needs to further adapt.
Yeah. So
To whatever that
for the
is.
audience, when do they know that they can add more?
Okay, that's a good question. So
Because it all depends on what you're doing. Like if
Yeah.
if you're working on cultivating more mobility, like what are you gonna do? Are you gonna add more reps into the certain exercise? Or are you gonna add more
Time under tension.
time under tension or length or
so this is
Well-
why you need a good coach.
yeah? That's why when you're asking the question, I was like, but wait, what are you? In what?
Yeah.
Because like if it's the barbell, then I'll be like, okay, then we add 5 more pounds.
Yeah.
Because you can, right? Because you were able to complete 135 pounds for 3 sets of 12, and I gave you the range of 8 to 12. Now you completed that end range of repetition. So add 5 more pounds, and then we'll climb up again, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then once you get 12, again, add more, something like that. You know, I'm just throwing out an example.
Yeah, that's where it definitely starts getting nuanced, because it depends. It depends. Do you even want to add more? Like,
it's very situational, I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
It is.
You have to kind of like look at what the person is doing, what the client's doing, and be like, what can he benefit from the more?
Yeah.
Is it more volume? Is it more intensity? Is it
more
more
time?
time?
Right. I don't want to give an answer to that, because I feel like somebody will listen to it and just be like,
and apply it. That's what I need to do right now.
So I think that the answer to that is like, if you really want to understand like when you should be pushing a little bit more or when you should be maintaining or whatever, like that's where a coach is golden, because he can answer these questions for you. For example, like it happens to me a lot where somebody will tell me like, that was a really hard set, and I'm like, let me see you do that, and then all of a sudden they can do 5 more reps than they were previously thinking. Like I see them like, okay, I'm getting to 12 because that's what they were doing, and they had already told me that 12 was really difficult, that I could barely do 12. And then all of a sudden we're getting to 15 like it's nothing, because I'm here watching you, telling you like, you could definitely do another rep, go for another one, go for another one. So I think that like a lot of people fall victim to that, getting comfortable, especially when you program and you're like, I do 20 when I curl. That's what a lot of people do. Like, oh, it's curls, I do 20. Like they just have like exercise. I choose if it's this exercise, I always use this weight. And I think that with like beginners and a lot of people, like that's usually the case.
That may work for a little bit, and eventually it's gonna plateau.
Exactly, exactly. Because once your body can do the 20 without an issue,
it's no stimulus.
There's no,
or at least
stimulus. Exactly. There's no reason to change.
Yeah.
There's no reason to change.
So what about? I mean, we're discussing it in terms of the weight training, but when it comes to mobility, how can a person progress?
Okay, so this is where I think, for example, like as a measurement of as a tool for seeing yourself moving better, like taking videos, can be useful, and comparing certain things. So understanding so I think that with mobility, quality is always over quantity. So that's why the video is important too. So like, what does the quality of the movement look like? So not only are you getting more space in the movement, are you getting more like deeper into a certain range of motion, but how does the quality and the control of that movement look? Because with mobility, you could do a lot of different things. You could change a position. That could be a way to progress, so like going from a position where gravity is not challenging the joint to a position where gravity is now challenging the joint, to then even loading it, or even the exercise selection, doing like an isometric versus a lift-off and things like that. So there's a lot of ways to progress, and I think that a lot of people are stuck to the weight thing. Yeah. Like the only way to progress is through weight or through reps, and those are very simple ways and very effective ways of progressing, but there's so much that you could do. Tempo, that's another big one. That if you want a safe answer for that question, tempo.
So keeping the same weight, right?
Same volume.
So let's say, let's explain what tempo is. Tempo is the speed of the repetition. Okay, so the repetition is going to have the concentric, eccentric movement.
And maybe isometric.
Maybe an isometric. And so if you tell the person, I want you to go up, I'm going to make it in very simple terms. I want you to go up in 2 seconds, and I want you to go down in 2 seconds, and I want you to pause for 2 seconds on your chest when doing the bench press. Okay, so that takes about 6 to 7 seconds per rep. So we're going to do 135 today. So we do that tempo for this amount of weeks. You end up getting 12 reps, and then all of a sudden, to progress it, we're like, okay, so let's slow it down a little bit more, but we're going to keep the same weight. Now we're going to go up in 2, we're going to go down in 3, pause for 2. And so that by itself, just by adding that little second on the pause at the bottom position of the bench press on your chest, that's going to make a huge difference in the amount of tension that you put on the muscle. And the muscle is going to respond to that new tension by getting stronger or gaining more muscle mass.
Exactly. I mean, do a 10-second isometric. It's in an exercise. Like you're going to feel that. So to compare that to adding 1 second per rep, it might not seem like a lot, but over a 10-rep set, that's going to be an extra 10 seconds that you're holding those positions for.
Yeah.
I remember this menace of a coach sitting to my left about a year and a half, or maybe 2 years ago, gave me and the other plethora of his clients a 10-second eccentric on both squats and deadlifts. I have never seen and my erectors burn like that ever again.
Yeah, and it also makes
Yeah.
you again. This could even when you work tempo a lot like that, it could even improve your mobility because again you're contracting in those end ranges.
For more time.
For more time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so tempo is a great one. It also makes you more aware of your movement, of leaks that might be happening within your movement. And when I say leaks, I just mean unnecessary movement that might be occurring. If you want to work on certain positions, like if you get stuck in the middle of your squat or if you get stuck on the bottom of your deadlift, you could change the tempo to specifically target those positions so that you can strengthen them. So yeah, I think that's a good answer as a general safe answer that probably most people would benefit from without risking
Much.
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Is slowing down their tempo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to think that slowing down your tempo is going to make you stronger, right? Because usually we want to
Move
look
fast.
at the weight, the number of the bar increasing, and it's hard to just be like, okay, I'll stick to 135 and slow it down. When you just want to just put on the extra, 2.5 on each side to make it 140. But if you do it that way, then when you go back to doing 135 with the regular tempo that you started with, like the 2 seconds up, 2 seconds down, 2 second pause, all of a sudden it's going to feel like super light. So like if you know the bar is feeling lighter, that 135 is feeling lighter, then you already know that you're stronger.
Also,
Yeah.
probably moving faster too. If you can get a certain weight tempoed and you go back to the regular exercise with a no
Mhm.
tempo, to probably
Right.
move
Yeah.
faster
it'll
too.
move
Yeah.
fast, yeah.
Yeah,
You
for
have
sure.
more control
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. When you slow down movements, it also works on the stability aspect of the movement. And this is something that I talked with you a lot. Sometimes your body won't let you tap into your full strength, let's say, like your full capacity of strength, if it feels instability in a certain joint. And that's, of course, mobility training can help that a lot in terms of stability. So the more stable a joint is, the more access it will give you to tap into more contraction, to harder contractions. So without even increasing the muscle or the actual strength in your body, I'm talking about just, let's say that your wrists are really unstable. Let's say that your wrists are weak and unstable. And for
Would you
your bench
define
press-
stability by low contractility?
Yes.
Okay.
So and also coordination of contractility. So like the ability of those muscles to contract together. at the same time.
Synchronicity.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So if you have a really unstable, weak wrist, and you're bench pressing, and you can bench press 315. I don't know. I can't bench press 315, but if you can bench press 315, I would say that you're missing out. Because if you're weak around the wrist and you're already benching that much, you could probably push that up without actually getting your chest stronger. You could push that bench press up by working on the stability of the joints that are required to perform that.
So what you're telling me is that if I get more mobile, I'm going to get bigger and stronger.
I'm afraid to say yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Sounds like the theme of the rhetoric that we've been expelling on the social media for the past,
Yeah.
like 2 years or more.
It'll get there.
One day.
It'll get there.
I think people are getting more open to the idea of mobility and of other types of training. I think that people have been resistant to it for
Especially
a long
when they
time.
plateau
Yeah.
and when they hit the wall, and they're like, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Let me question everything.
I think we're so lucky, I think, to be living in this period, especially for our field, where
gonna
right
say
now
that,
there's a
yeah.
huge movement of people adopting this type of lifestyle, or at least
Especially
being
since
more
after
open to it.
COVID.
Exactly.
Yeah, COVID
Yeah.
really made people care about their health a lot more,
Exactly.
I'd say. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that
I hope you don't get flagged for me saying that word. I just remember
shadow
that.
banned.
Damn.
The disease. You
The
heard
vid.
You heard it on the YouTube videos how they
Yeah.
say it's the disease.
Just call it the vid.
But yeah, the mobility. I think that it's super important. I think it's super important for longevity, for health, for movement quality, for just everything.
Your aesthetic.
Aesthetics.
Imposing.
Yeah. Your aesthetic ambitions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Activity ambitions.
Activity ambitions.
Anything. But yeah,
That wrapping that up.
I think that does it.
Cool. All right. So thank you for watching. We'll be back for more next week. I hope you enjoyed this podcast of Fitness Uncovered, and we will see you in the next episode.
Peace.